Guess how much this comic book is worth? Dollars. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Rod's Comics. So we do have a couple of interesting titles to cover on this episode. We have the first one, which is, of course, a household name. No formal introduction needed. It's Star Wars. It's number one. It's the first comic to movie adaptation of Star Wars from 1977. So this one was actually released July 10, 1977. So I was about, 4 years old then? You can do the math, all right? So this was written by Roy Thomas, and one of the artists was Howard Chaykin. Of course, this is number one, and this is the first appearance of Luke Skywalker, of Leia, Princess Leia, C-3PO, R2-D2, and Darth Vader, and I think the first cover of Han Solo, and who else is in there? Yeah, and I think Obi-Wan Kenobi, all right? If I'm not mistaken. So there, that's Star Wars 1. And there is another variant to this book. I'll tell you about that in a bit. But this particular issue, I think it goes for around $700. It's a 9.8 or 9.6. I think if it's a 9.6. And this would be graded at, if I look at the comic book, I think this is a 9.8, to be honest. I mean, I've never taken it out of the comic bag. It looks brand spanking new. It looks so crispy. And yeah, this is probably 9.8, so it could potentially be worth more. There was a 35-cent variant to this, which is very, very rare. Apparently, it's like an experimental issue where they tried a different price point, and they only release that comic book to like certain states or certain parts of the US. So it was very rare. Not very many people obviously had a copy of that. But it's the exact same comic, except it had a 35-cent price tag. This one has 30 cents. So this is the regular edition, and the rare one is the 35-cent one. And as recently as May 27, one was sold on eBay for $4,499. Folks, $4,499 for the 35-cent variant of this comic book. It was sold on eBay last May. So pretty crazy, all right? And I think somebody also paid like $2,500 or something. And I think there's one on eBay of just this regular 30-cent one for like $3,000. But it just depends on how much people are willing to pay, I guess. But I think the fair market value for a 9.6, which is a lower grade than this one, is about $700. So this should be worth a couple of hundred more, because I think it's a 9.8. But it's not graded, so it's one of the books that I'm definitely going to have graded given the opportunity. All right, so again, Star Wars 1. Yeah, definitely an iconic title, an iconic comic book. And the funny thing about Star Wars is that the comic book actually came out, I think, before the movie did, or at least it was released to the public before the movie did. And I think that's applicable to the second issue. It came out before, I think, Jabba the Hutt showed up in the movie, so they came up with a funny version of Jabba the Hutt in the Star Wars 2 comic book, which I also own a copy of. And that kind of, boosted up the price on the market as well, because of just that oddity where they had to come up with their own version of Jabba the Hutt, because the movie wasn't out yet, so they didn't know how Jabba the Hutt really looked like yet. So there. But anyways, yeah, Star Wars 1, iconic movie, iconic comic book. Fair market value for this one, I'd probably say maybe $1,000 for a 9.8, but for a 9.6, $700. So if you're thinking that's already a lot of money for a comic book, you obviously don't know anything about the hobby. Now, this is probably the most interesting comic book in now my collection. This was handed down to me by my dad, and I obviously couldn't take all the comic books with me, so I picked out the ones that I'm familiar with, the X-Men, the Spider-Man titles, the Batman, and the Fantastic Four, Avengers, all that stuff. And this one just showed up out of nowhere, and I guess I was kind of surprised why my dad would have a Lois Lane comic book. I was thinking this is like along the lines of like Archie's, but of course I know Lois Lane and I know that she is Superman's girlfriend, but I didn't think much about the comic book itself. So yeah, as you can see, interesting cover. It's a cat fight between Lois Lane and Catwoman. Cat fight, no pun intended. This one came out November 10, 1966. 1966, so it's older than your mom, your dad. This is the first Silver Age appearance of Catwoman, the Silver Age version. There is, of course, the Golden Age version, which she looks totally different. This is how we know Catwoman to be, and this is her first appearance dressed in such a costume. Yeah, and it also guest stars Penguin, Batman, and Robin also make an appearance in this issue. And there are only 1,500 graded, if I'm not mistaken. So that means it's not that common. Most comic books, there's thousands and thousands of them that are graded. This one only has 1,500 graded. And I think only 16 issues of this in at least the 9.6 grade. So this is not been graded. Looking at it, you can see that it has a discolored cover page. But besides that, that's its only imperfection. And I heard that you can actually clean this up. There's actually a way to whiten the pages, to clean it up, to have it pressed before you send it out to be graded. And I think once this gets cleaned up and the discoloration is removed, this should be able to fetch a grade of at least maybe a 9.2 or 9.6. If it does get the 9.6 grade, guess how much this comic book is worth? $9,500. $9,500 US dollars. If this gets a grade of a 9.6, which, best case scenario, it's in great shape. See, there's the page is just discolored, but if you look at the spine, it's perfect. There's no spine ticks, no rips on the edges. That's a nice looking comic book. It's just a discoloration from aging. And again, I am optimistic that this can be remedied, and just imagine if I can get a 9.6 rating for that. But obviously keeping it because it's part of my dad's collection, and it's just surprising that a comic book that I was laughing at when I saw it in my dad's collection is actually worth $9,500 US dollars, and somebody's actually really willing to pay that amount. There are some sold on eBay. The highest grade one that I found, I think, is like a 6.0, and I think that sold for like $500-600, but that's a 6.0. And for those that don't know comics, the grading drastically affects the market value of the comic book. So if a comic book is like a 9.8, that can, let's say, be worth $10,000. And then if all of a sudden it's like an 8 or a 7, immediately that's going to go down to like maybe $1,000. And then if it's a 6, obviously $500. But that's still a pretty good amount of money for a worse conditioned comic book. So there. You're not familiar? Well, now you are. Never judge a book by its cover. So that's another episode of Rod's Comics. 2 very interesting, polarizing titles. A very popular comic book and movie franchise, and a comic book that looks like it's out of place in my dad's collection and now my collection, but apparently is like 10 times more valuable. So my name is Rod Rodriguez. Until the next episode.